The dust-choked air of Willow Creek, Colorado Territory, 1875, hung heavy as Victoria Neville stumbled onto the crude wooden platform. Her tear-streaked face caught the harsh sunlight, hands bound before her with coarse rope that bit into her wrists. The jeering crowd of miners, drifters, and townspeople gathered in the makeshift town square seemed more monster than human to her eyes. The auctioneer's voice cut through the din like a knife, announcing her as prime stock with a debt to settle. Victoria shuddered, her once fine dress now travel-stained and torn at the hem, her auburn hair falling loose from its pins as she fought to maintain her dignity despite the crushing weight of fear. In the back of the crowd, Jackson Cole narrowed his eyes beneath the brim of his weathered Stetson, standing a head taller than most men present. His broad shoulders tensed as he observed the proceedings with growing disgust. His hand rested near the well-worn Colt at his hip, jaw clenched tight beneath several days' worth of stubble. The woman trembling on the auction block couldn't be much older than 25, and something in her defiant posture despite her tears stirred something deep within him. $200. Do I hear $250 for this fine specimen? The auctioneer bellowed, his greasy hair slicked back under a bowler hat too small for his bulbous head. A miner near the front raised a grimy hand. $250. $300, shouted another man, his eyes roving over Victoria with undisguised lust. The bidding continued, each increase causing Victoria to flinch as if physically struck. Jackson had seen enough. He pushed his way through the crowd, ignoring the curses and grumbles of those he shouldered aside. When he reached the front, he raised his hand and called out in a voice that carried across the square, deep and commanding. "She's mine now." The auctioneer paused, eyebrow raised at the newcomer. "I got $350 on the floor. You offering more, cowboy?" Jackson reached into his vest and pulled out a leather pouch. $500. He tossed the pouch onto the platform where it landed with a heavy thud. "And we end this disgrace right now." A murmur rippled through the crowd as the auctioneer hastily counted the money, eyes widening at the sum. Victoria's gaze locked with Jackson's, confusion and suspicion mingling with the faintest flicker of hope in her tear-brightened eyes. "Sold," the auctioneer declared, pocketing a portion of the money before handing the rest to a man in an expensive suit standing nearby, clearly the creditor who had arranged this humiliation. "She's all yours, mister." Jackson stepped forward and extended his hand to help Victoria down from the platform. She hesitated, regarding him warily. "I won't hurt you, madam," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "But we should leave before these folks find something else to entertain themselves with." Victoria swallowed hard, then placed her bound hands in his calloused palm. "Why?" she whispered as he helped her down. "Let's just say I've seen enough injustice for one lifetime," Jackson replied, leading her away from the dispersing crowd. "My horse is hitched outside the general store. We can talk there." The townsfolk parted before them, some looking disappointed at the anticlimactic end to their afternoon's entertainment, others eyeing Jackson with calculating gazes that suggested they might consider challenging his claim later. He kept his free hand near his pistol, a silent warning that such a challenge would be unwise. Victoria stumbled slightly as they walked, legs unsteady after hours standing on the auction block. "My name is Victoria Neville," she offered quietly, her cultured accent revealing her Eastern origins. "Jackson Cole," he responded, guiding her toward a magnificent chestnut stallion with a white blaze down its nose. Once they reached the horse, he turned to face her, pulling a knife from his boot. Victoria flinched, but he only used it to cut the ropes binding her wrists. "Thank you," she said, rubbing the raw skin where the rope had chafed. Jackson nodded, replacing his knife. "What brought you to this situation, Miss Neville? You're clearly not from these parts." Victoria's eyes dropped to the dusty street. "My father died 6 months ago," I discovered afterward that he had gambled away our fortune and mortgaged our home in Baltimore to a man named Rutherford Bell. Bell offered me a proposition I couldn't accept. When I refused him, he called in my father's debts. I lost everything. And Bell followed you west? Jackson asked, his expression darkening. No. I fled west hoping to reach my aunt in San Francisco. But my stagecoach was robbed near Denver. The bandits took everything I had left. Her voice strengthened with indignation. I arrived in this town 3 days ago with nothing but the clothes on my back. I was trying to find work when a man named Dempsey claimed my father owed him money too. He produced papers I know were forged, but the sheriff here is his cousin. They arrested me for debt and... Her voice faltered. Today was the result. Jackson's jaw tightened. Dempsey, the man in the fancy suit by the auctioneer. Victoria nodded. Well, Miss Neville, it seems you've had a run of terrible luck, but it ends today. He untied his horse's reins from the hitching post. I have a small ranch about half a day's ride from here. You're welcome to rest there while you decide your next move. Victoria regarded him cautiously. Why would you help me? You don't know me. Let's just say I recognize a scheme when I see one. No one deserves to be sold like cattle. He paused, then added more softly. And my ma raised me better than to leave a lady in distress. I can't repay you, Victoria said with quiet dignity. At least not immediately. I'm not asking for payment. Jackson mounted his horse, then extended his hand down to her. But we should leave town now. Dempsey doesn't strike me as the type to take this lying down. As if summoned by his name, Dempsey appeared from the saloon across the street, flanked by 2 rough-looking men. His face contorted with anger when he spotted Victoria standing free beside Jackson. That's far enough, cowboy, Dempsey called out. There's been a misunderstanding. That woman is still mine. Jackson's expression didn't change, but his voice carried a dangerous edge. I paid fair and square. The auction's over. The auction was a formality, Dempsey snarled, approaching. She owes me $1,000. Your $500 barely covers half her debt. Funny. That's not what your auctioneer said. Jackson's hand moved casually toward his pistol. He called sold plain as day. Everyone heard it. A small crowd began to gather again, sensing more entertainment. Victoria tensed beside Jackson's horse. The debt isn't settled, Dempsey insisted, his hand also hovering near his weapon. And I aim to collect, one way or another. Jackson assessed the situation rapidly. Dempsey and his 2 companions were armed, but the odds weren't impossible. Still, a gunfight in the middle of town wasn't his preferred option, especially with Victoria potentially caught in the crossfire. Tell you what, Dempsey, Jackson said calmly, I'll double my offer. Another $500 to clear any remaining debt. Then we all walk away satisfied. Dempsey's eyes narrowed, calculating. 1,000 more. 700, and that's final, Jackson countered. Take it or try your luck drawing against me. Your choice. A tense silence fell over the street. Victoria held her breath, acutely aware that her future hung in the balance of this standoff. Finally, Dempsey's shoulders relaxed slightly. 700, he agreed. Cash now. Jackson reached into his saddlebag and produced another pouch. Count it if you like. Dempsey snatched the money and thumbed through it quickly. Looks right. His eyes lingered on Victoria. She's more trouble than she's worth anyway. He tipped his hat mockingly. Enjoy your purchase, cowboy. As Dempsey and his men retreated toward the saloon, Jackson extended his hand once more to Victoria. Time to go, before he changes his mind. Victoria hesitated only briefly before accepting his help and mounting behind him. She placed her hands awkwardly at his sides, uncertain where to hold. "You'll want to hold tighter than that when we ride," Jackson advised. "Unless you fancy falling off." After a moment's hesitation, Victoria wrapped her arms around his waist. Jackson nudged his horse forward, and they rode out of Willow Creek at a steady trot, the curious gazes of the townspeople following them until they disappeared around a bend in the road. Once they were well away from town, Jackson urged his horse to a gallop across the open plain. Victoria clung to him, the wind whipping her hair behind her. After the horror of the auction block, the sensation of racing across the open country filled her with an unexpected sense of freedom. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel something close to hope. They rode for hours, following trails that wound through scrubby foothills and across streams swollen with late spring runoff. The landscape changed gradually, becoming greener and more varied as they climbed in elevation. Eventually, they crested a rise, and Jackson reined in his horse. "There it is," he said, nodding toward the valley below. "Home." Victoria peered over his shoulder. A modest ranch spread out before them, a sturdy two-story cabin with smoke curling from its chimney, a barn, corral, and several outbuildings. A small herd of cattle grazed in a nearby pasture, and a creek glinted in the late afternoon sunlight as it wound through the property. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. Jackson made a noncommittal sound, but she could sense his pride in the place. He nudged his horse forward, and they descended into the valley. As they approached the cabin, the door swung open, and an older man with a shock of white hair emerged, rifle in hand. When he recognized Jackson, he lowered the weapon. "About time you got back," the man called out. "Was beginning to think you'd decided to settle in town." "Got delayed," Jackson replied as he brought his horse to a stop in front of the cabin. He dismounted and turned to help Victoria down. "Thomas, this is Miss Victoria Neville. She'll be staying with us for a while." "Miss Neville, this is Thomas Walsh, my foreman and the closest thing to family I've got out here." Thomas's bushy eyebrows rose as he took in Victoria's appearance. "Madam," he greeted her with a respectful nod. "Pardon my surprise. Jack doesn't usually bring guests home." "I appreciate your hospitality, Mr. Walsh," Victoria replied formally, though her legs were unsteady after the long ride. Thomas shot Jackson a questioning look, which the younger man answered with a slight shake of his head, a silent promise to explain later. "Miss Neville's had a difficult journey," Jackson said aloud. "She could use a hot meal and some rest." "Of course," Thomas agreed, stepping aside to usher them into the cabin. "Just pulled some stew off the fire. Plenty to go around." The interior of the cabin was surprisingly comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace, a solid wooden table with chairs, and several well-worn but clean furnishings. Shelves lined one wall, filled with books, an unexpected sight that made Victoria pause. "You can wash up there," Jackson said, pointing to a basin on a stand near the back door. "The pump's just outside if you need more water." Victoria nodded gratefully and moved to clean the travel dust from her face and hands. As she did so, she observed Jackson and Thomas conversing in low tones by the fireplace. The older man's expression shifted from surprise to anger to sympathy as Jackson presumably explained her situation. Thomas approached her as she finished washing. "Miss Neville, we have a small room upstairs you can use. It ain't fancy, but it's private and the bed's clean." "That's very kind, thank you," Victoria replied. "I'll show you up after supper," Thomas continued, "and I believe we have some clothes that might suit you better then." He gestured vaguely at her torn and dusty dress. "Whose clothes?" Victoria asked carefully. "My late wife's," Thomas explained. "She passed on 5 years ago. Similar build to you, though. Jack's ma left some things too, before she moved back east. Between the two, we should find something serviceable." Relief washed over Victoria. The prospect of clean clothes and a private room seemed like unimaginable luxury after the past weeks of hardship. Supper was a simple but hearty beef stew with fresh baked bread. Victoria ate ravenously, suddenly aware of how little she'd eaten in days. The men tactfully avoided questioning her during the meal, though she could feel Jackson's eyes on her occasionally, assessing. After they'd eaten, Thomas showed her to a small but neat bedroom upstairs. A chest at the foot of the bed contained several dresses and undergarments that, while not fashionable, were clean and in good repair. "The washroom's down the hall," Thomas explained. "We keep a barrel full on the porch for washing. It's no city bathroom, but it serves." Left alone, Victoria sat on the edge of the bed, overcome by the day's events. The terror of the auction block, the unexpected rescue, and now this strange sanctuary. It was almost too much to process. Exhaustion claimed her quickly, and she fell asleep fully clothed atop the quilt. Downstairs, Jackson poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to Thomas. "An auction block, Jack?" Thomas shook his head in disbelief. "I thought those days were behind us." "Not for women with no protectors, apparently," Jackson replied grimly. "Dempsey's running some kind of scheme, targeting vulnerable women, forcing debts on them. And you paid him? Twice." Thomas's weathered face creased in concern. "That's $1,200. Most of what you got for the cattle drive." Jackson shrugged. "What would you have had me do? Leave her there?" "No, but—" Thomas sighed. "You've got a soft heart under all that leather. Boy, always have had. Just hope it doesn't get you killed someday." "She needs time to recover and figure out her next steps," Jackson said, ignoring the comment. "I'm not asking her to leave until she's ready." Thomas studied him over the rim of his glass. "And if Dempsey or his kind come looking?" Jackson's expression hardened. "Then they'll find out why most folks around here leave the Flying Sea Ranch alone." The next morning, Victoria woke to sunlight streaming through the small window of her room. For a moment, she didn't recognize her surroundings, panic rising in her throat until memory returned. She was safe at least for now on Jackson Cole's ranch. She rose and selected one of the dresses from the chest, a simple blue calico that was a bit loose but serviceable. After washing and dressing, she made her way downstairs to find Thomas alone in the kitchen, frying bacon. "Morning, Miss Neville," he greeted her. "Sleep well." "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted. "Thank you. Where is Mr. Cole?" "Jack's been up since before dawn," Thomas replied, sliding bacon onto a plate. "Checking the herd. We lost a few head to wolves last week. He'll be back for breakfast soon." Victoria moved to help him, setting the table and pouring coffee into tin cups. "Mr. Walsh, I want you to know that I don't intend to impose on your hospitality for long. Once I've recovered my strength, I'll find work and repay Mr. Cole for his generosity." Thomas's bushy eyebrows rose. Jack didn't mention anything about repayment. "Nevertheless," Victoria said firmly, "I pay my debts, the legitimate ones at least." The door opened before Thomas could respond, and Jackson entered, bringing with him the scent of fresh air and horses. He removed his hat and hung it on a peg by the door. "Morning," he nodded to Victoria. "That dress suits you better than the other." Victoria smoothed the worn fabric self-consciously. "It's very comfortable. Thank you for all this." They ate breakfast together, the conversation flowing more easily than the night before. Victoria learned that Jackson had established his ranch 7 years ago after working as a trail boss on cattle drives. Thomas had been with him from the beginning, having known Jackson's father years before. "Where is your father now?" Victoria asked, then immediately regretted the question when Jackson's expression darkened. "Died at Shiloh," he answered shortly. "Confederate side." "I'm sorry," Victoria said quietly. My father served in the Union Army, though he never saw combat. Jackson nodded, accepting her words without comment. The war might have ended a decade ago, but its shadows still lingered across the country. After breakfast, Jackson invited Victoria to tour the ranch. You should know your way around, in case you need anything while you're here. They walked together through the property, Jackson pointing out the various outbuildings, the garden where they grew vegetables in summer, and the creek that provided water year-round. Victoria listened attentively, appreciating the simple order of ranch life after months of chaos. It's very peaceful here, she commented as they stood watching the cattle graze in the distance. Most days, Jackson agreed, though ranching has its own kinds of trouble. Drought, disease, predators, rustlers. Rustlers? Do you have problems with theft? Not lately. We've built a reputation for being a hard target. His hand brushed the pistol at his hip unconsciously. Most outlaws prefer easier pickings. Victoria studied him, seeing beyond the rugged exterior to the complexity beneath. You've lived an eventful life, Mr. Cole. Jackson glanced at her, amusement touching his eyes. Jack, he corrected. Only strangers and people who don't like me call me Mr. Cole. Jack, Victoria repeated, testing the familiarity. And you should call me Victoria. He nodded, a hint of a smile lifting the corner of his mouth. Victoria it is. Days passed, falling into a rhythm that Victoria found surprisingly comfortable. She insisted on earning her keep, taking over much of the cooking and household management. Though city-bred, she proved a quick learner, adapting to ranch life with determined grace. Her nightmares were the only evidence of her trauma. Sometimes she woke gasping, the memory of the auction block too vivid to escape even in sleep. On those nights, she would sit by her window, watching the stars and reminding herself she was safe. One morning, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Victoria was hanging laundry to dry when she noticed a cloud of dust on the horizon. A rider was approaching fast. She hurried to alert Jackson, who was repairing a fence near the barn. Someone's coming, she called, pointing toward the dust cloud. Jackson straightened, squinting against the sunlight. His hand moved to his gun, but relaxed as the rider drew closer. It's Vince Porter, he told Victoria. Runs the general store in River Junction. Good man. Vince Porter proved to be a friendly, round-faced man in his 40s. He greeted Jackson warmly before being introduced to Victoria. Madam, he tipped his hat politely. Pleased to meet you. What brings you out this way, Vince? Jackson asked, offering the man water from his canteen. Vince took a long drink before answering. Thought you should know there's been talk in town. Some men were asking about you, and about a woman you might have with you. Jackson's expression hardened. What men? Strangers. 3 of them. Well-dressed but hard-looking, if you take my meaning. They were buying drinks at the saloon, casual-like, but asking pointed questions. Vince glanced at Victoria. They described a woman matching the lady here. Said she was a thief who'd stolen from their boss back east. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. Rutherford Bell, she whispered. He's found me. Jackson's jaw tightened. Did these men say where they were staying? Took rooms at the hotel, Vince replied. Claimed they were just passing through. But, he shrugged. Thought you should know, considering how interested they were in your business. I appreciate the warning, Jackson said grimly. After Vince departed, Victoria paced the kitchen anxiously. I should leave. I've brought trouble to your door. You're not going anywhere, Jackson stated flatly. These men work for Bell. He's dangerous and vindictive, Victoria insisted. I rejected his advances, and he's determined to punish me for it. He won't stop. Then perhaps it's time someone stopped him, Jackson replied, his calm certainty somehow more intimidating than anger would have been. Victoria stared at him. You don't understand. Bell is wealthy and connected. He has politicians and judges in his pocket. This isn't Baltimore, Jackson reminded her. Out here, a man stands or falls on his own merits. Bell's connections won't help him much in Colorado territory. I can't ask you to fight my battles, Victoria said, her voice breaking slightly. You've already done too much. Jackson moved closer, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. You didn't ask. I'm offering. His blue eyes held hers steadily. No one's going to hurt you again, Victoria. Not while I'm breathing. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of feelings that had been growing since that first day. Victoria found herself wanting to lean into his strength, to believe that this man could indeed protect her from the shadows of her past. Instead, she stepped back, needing distance to think clearly. What do you intend to do? First, we prepare, Jackson said, letting his hands fall to his sides. If they come here, they'll find more than they bargained for. Over the next 2 days, Jackson and Thomas reinforced the ranch's defenses. They moved the cattle to the far pasture, barricaded vulnerable windows, and positioned rifles at strategic points throughout the property. Victoria watched their preparations with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. On the evening of the 3rd day, Thomas spotted riders approaching 5 of them, moving deliberately toward the ranch house. Showtime, Thomas muttered, checking his shotgun. Jackson positioned Victoria in the root cellar beneath the kitchen. Stay here until I come for you, he instructed, handing her a loaded pistol. If anyone but me or Thomas opens that door, shoot them. Victoria nodded, hands steady despite her fear. Jackson studied her face for a moment, then, impulsively, leaned forward and pressed a brief, hard kiss to her forehead. For luck, he said gruffly, then climbed the ladder and closed the trapdoor behind him. From her hiding place, Victoria could hear the muffled sounds of horses arriving, men's voices, then Jackson's deeper tones responding. The conversation seemed civil at first, then grew more heated. Suddenly, there was a shout, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Victoria clutched the pistol tightly, heart pounding as the battle raged above her. The gunfire was sporadic at first, then intensified. She heard breaking glass, the splintering of wood, and men shouting. At one point, heavy footsteps crossed directly overhead, followed by the thud of bodies grappling. Then, abruptly, silence fell. Victoria held her breath, straining to hear any movement. Minutes passed with no sound. Fear gripped her. Had Jackson and Thomas been killed? Were Bell's men now searching for her? The trapdoor suddenly lifted. Victoria raised the pistol, finger tightening on the trigger. It's me, Jackson's voice called down. It's over. She lowered the gun, weak with relief as she climbed the ladder. The kitchen was a shambles, broken crockery, splintered furniture, and bullet holes in the walls. But Jackson was alive, though bleeding from a graze along his cheekbone. Thomas? She asked urgently. Taking care of the horses, Jackson assured her. Took a bullet in the arm, but he'll be fine. Victoria's gaze shifted to the front room, where 2 bodies lay motionless on the floor. And them? 2 dead. 3 running with their tails between their legs, Jackson said grimly. They won't be back. Victoria sagged against the wall, the enormity of what had just happened washing over her. They came to kill you. Because of me. They came looking for an easy target, Jackson corrected, reaching for a cloth to wipe the blood from his face. Found out their information was flawed. Victoria moved to help him, taking the cloth and gently cleaning his wound. I should feel guilty that men died today, she said quietly. But all I feel is relief that you and Thomas survived. Jackson caught her hand, holding it against his cheek. There's no shame in that. Some men choose a path that leads only to the grave. Their eyes met and held. Something in Jackson's gaze made Victoria's breath catch a warmth, an intensity that spoke of more than mere protection or duty. I thought I might lose you, she admitted softly. Takes more than a few hired guns to bring me down, he replied, his thumb stroking the inside of her wrist. The moments stretched between them, taut with unspoken feelings. Then Thomas's voice from outside broke the spell. Jack! Riders coming from the south. They hurried to the door, Victoria's heart sinking at the thought of more violence. But as the riders drew closer, Jackson relaxed. It's Sheriff Daniels from River Junction, he explained. Vince must have alerted him. The sheriff proved to be a grizzled, no-nonsense lawman who viewed the situation with pragmatic detachment. After examining the bodies and taking statements from Jackson, Thomas, and Victoria, he declared the shooting justified self-defense. Your lucky Cole was here, madam, he told Victoria as his deputies loaded the dead men onto horses. Bell's got a reputation that reaches even out here. These won't be the last men he sends. Then what am I to do? Victoria asked, despair creeping into her voice. Sheriff Daniels scratched his beard thoughtfully. Seems to me a woman traveling alone is always vulnerable. But a married woman, with a husband to protect her rights. He glanced meaningfully between Victoria and Jackson. That's a different matter entirely. Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks at the sheriff's implication. Jackson, standing beside her, went very still. Just a thought, Daniels said, mounting his horse. Bell might not give up easily on property he thinks is his. But he might think twice about challenging another man's wife. With a tip of his hat, he and his deputies rode away, taking the bodies with them. An awkward silence fell as Victoria and Jackson stood watching the lawman depart. Thomas, arm now bandaged, cleared his throat loudly. Think I'll check on the cattle, he announced, making himself scarce with impressive speed for a wounded man. Left alone, Victoria and Jackson avoided each other's eyes. The sheriff's suggestion hung in the air between them, too significant to dismiss yet too presumptuous to acknowledge directly. We should clean up inside, Jackson finally said, turning toward the house. Victoria followed him, and together they began setting the ransacked kitchen to rights. They worked in silence for several minutes before Victoria found the courage to speak. The sheriff wasn't entirely wrong, she said quietly, keeping her eyes on the broken dishes she was gathering. A woman alone has few legal protections. Jackson paused in sweeping up shattered glass. What are you saying, Victoria? She straightened, finally meeting his gaze. I'm saying that I've come to care for you, Jack. More than I thought possible after knowing someone such a short time. The broom stilled in his hands. I care for you too, but marriage. That's not something to enter into for convenience or protection. Is that what you think I'm suggesting? Victoria moved closer to him. That I see you only as a shield against Bell? Isn't that what this conversation is about? Jackson asked, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. Victoria shook her head slowly. The sheriff's words may have prompted this discussion, but my feelings existed long before he spoke them. She took a deep breath. When I heard the gunfire today, when I thought you might be killed, I realized I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. Jackson's eyes darkened. He set the broom aside and closed the distance between them. Victoria, he said softly, reaching out to touch her cheek. I've wanted you since the moment I saw you on that auction block. Not as a possession to be bought, but as a woman to be cherished. Victoria leaned into his touch. Then perhaps the sheriff's suggestion has merit, though not for the reasons he intended. Jackson's thumb traced her lower lip. Are you proposing to me, Victoria Neville? A smile curved her mouth beneath his touch. I believe I am, Jackson Cole, though it's hardly conventional. Nothing about us has been conventional from the start, he pointed out, drawing her closer. When his lips finally met hers, Victoria felt as though every hardship she had endured had been leading her to this moment. This man. His kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent, but deepened as she responded, her arms winding around his neck. When they finally parted, both breathless, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. Is that a yes? Victoria whispered. That's a yes, he confirmed, a smile spreading across his face, the first full, unguarded smile she had seen from him. Though Thomas will never let me hear the end of it. As if summoned, Thomas's voice called from outside. Anybody dead in there? It's mighty quiet. Jackson and Victoria exchanged amused glances. We're fine, Jackson called back. Better than fine. When Thomas entered, he took one look at their entwined hands and grinned broadly. About time, he declared. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you two in the root cellar together. The next morning, Jackson rode into River Junction to speak with the preacher and make arrangements. Victoria spent the day nervously preparing the cabin, which would now truly be her home. The damage from the gunfight was substantial, but nothing that couldn't be repaired. Thomas, arm in a sling but otherwise irrepressible, helped where he could and offered a running commentary on married life that alternated between sentimental and scandalous. Never seen Jack take to anyone the way he took to you, he told Victoria as they sorted through the remaining undamaged dishes. Not since his mother left after the war. Victoria paused. Left? I thought she had gone back east. Thomas nodded. She did. Couldn't stand to stay in Colorado after learning Jack's father had died. Moved back to Philadelphia to live with her sister. Writes to Jack occasionally, but they haven't seen each other in years. That must have been difficult for him, Victoria said softly. Jack's had more than his share of people leaving, Thomas agreed. It's why he keeps to himself mostly. Safer that way. He fixed Victoria with a pointed look. Until you. Victoria understood the unspoken message. I'm not going anywhere, Thomas. This is my home now if you'll have me as part of it. Thomas's weathered face softened. Already are, far as I'm concerned. When Jackson returned that evening, he brought news that the preacher would come to the ranch the following Sunday to perform the ceremony. He also carried a small package, which he presented to Victoria after supper. It's not much, he said almost shyly, but a bride should have something new. Inside the package, Victoria found a simple silver ring set with a small, perfect sapphire. Jack, she breathed, eyes widening. It's beautiful. Belonged to my grandmother, he explained. My mother sent it to me years ago, said I might need it someday. His eyes met hers. Seems she was right. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Word spread quickly in the small community, and neighbors from miles around sent gifts or offers of help. Victoria was touched by the warmth of these strangers who accepted her so readily as Jack's chosen bride. On Sunday morning, Victoria dressed in her finest gown, one of Jack's mother's that Thomas had altered to fit her. As she pinned up her hair, she caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror and barely recognized herself. The haunted look that had shadowed her eyes since Baltimore was gone, replaced by a quiet joy that transformed her face. The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful. The preacher, a kind-faced man named Reverend Parker, performed the service in the ranch's front yard, with Thomas standing as Jack's best man and the neighbors gathered in a semicircle around them. As Victoria spoke her vows, she felt the last of her fear finally release its hold on her heart. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Parker declared, beaming at the couple. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Cole. Jack's kiss was tender and full of promise, drawing good-natured cheers from the assembled guests. As they turned to face their neighbors as husband and wife, Victoria felt a sense of belonging she had thought lost forever. The celebration continued well into the evening, with food and music and dancing in the yard. Victoria was introduced to so many neighbors she could hardly keep their names straight, but their genuine warmth made her feel welcome. As dusk fell, Jack pulled her aside from the festivities, leading her to a quiet spot near the corral. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," Victoria answered truthfully. "Though I'm still not sure I deserve all this." "You deserve everything good in this world," Jack said firmly, "and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." Victoria leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid strength of him. "I love you, Jack Cole," she whispered against his chest. "I think I have since you said, 'She's mine now,' and gave me back my freedom." Jack tilted her face up to his. "I love you too, Victoria Cole," he replied, the use of her new name sending a thrill through her. "And I think I have since I saw you standing on that auction block, fighting to keep your dignity even in tears." Their kiss was interrupted by Thomas calling for them to rejoin the party. With laughing reluctance, they returned to their guests, hand in hand. Later that night, after the celebration had ended and the neighbors had departed, Victoria and Jack stood on the porch of their cabin, looking out at the star-filled sky. "No regrets?" Jack asked softly, his arm around her shoulders. Victoria shook her head. "None. Though I wonder what Bell will do when he learns of our marriage." "Let him do his worst," Jack said confidently. "We're stronger together than apart." And as he led her inside to begin their life as husband and wife, Victoria believed him with her whole heart. The weeks following their wedding were a time of adjustment and deepening connection. Victoria threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm, learning the rhythms of the seasons and the needs of the land. Jack proved to be a patient teacher, never patronizing but always ready to explain or demonstrate when needed. Their nights were a revelation of tenderness and passion that healed old wounds for both of them. In Jack's arms, Victoria found not only desire but also acceptance and security she had never known before. And Jack, who had kept himself apart from others for so long, discovered the joy of complete trust in another person. One morning in late summer, as they sat drinking coffee on the porch, Victoria broached a subject that had been on her mind. "I've been thinking about my aunt in San Francisco," she said hesitantly. "I should write to her, let her know I'm safe and happy." Jack nodded. "You should. She must be worried about you." "I was also thinking," Victoria continued, studying her coffee cup, "that perhaps we could invite your mother to visit. For Christmas, maybe." Jack went still beside her. "My mother? Yes, I'd like to meet her, and to thank her for the ring that's now my wedding band." Victoria reached for his hand. "She should know what a good man her son has become." Jack's expression was unreadable for a long moment. Then he squeezed her hand. "I'll write to her," he promised, "though I can't guarantee she'll come." "All we can do is extend the invitation," Victoria said gently. "The choice will be hers." As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, life at the Flying Sea Ranch settled into a comfortable routine. The damage from the gunfight was fully repaired, and Victoria had added her own touches to the cabin, making it truly their home. There had been no further trouble from Rutherford Bell or his men, though occasionally Jack rode into town with his pistol prominently displayed, a silent reminder to any watching eyes that the Cole Ranch remained vigilant. In October, Thomas announced his intention to visit his brother in Denver for the winter months. "You newlyweds could use some privacy," he declared with a wink that made Victoria blush. "Besides, my bones ache when the snow flies these days." Though they tried to dissuade him, Thomas was adamant. "I'll be back in spring," he promised. Just in time for calving season. After Thomas departed, the ranch seemed unusually quiet. Victoria and Jack worked side by side, preparing for the coming winter, curing meat, storing vegetables from the garden, ensuring the livestock had adequate shelter and feed. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, they sat before the fire, Victoria reading aloud from one of Jack's books while he cleaned his rifle. The domestic scene was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Jack was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "Stay here," he told Victoria, moving to the window. Victoria set aside the book, her heart racing. "Who is it?" "Can't tell in this snow," Jack replied, his voice tense. "But it's at least 3 riders." The memory of the previous attack was still fresh in both their minds. Victoria retrieved her own pistol from a drawer, determined not to be helpless if danger had returned to their door. A knock sounded, firm but not threatening. Jack positioned himself to the side of the door, rifle ready. "Who's there?" he called. "Sheriff Daniels from River Junction," came the reply. "Got some news you should hear, Cole." Jack relaxed slightly but remained cautious as he opened the door. Sheriff Daniels stood on the porch, snow dusting his hat and shoulders. Behind him were 2 deputies, their horses stamping in the gathering snow. "Evening, Sheriff," Jack greeted him. "What brings you out in weather like this?" "Thought you'd want to know right away," Daniels said, stomping snow from his boots as Jack gestured him inside. He nodded respectfully to Victoria. "Madam, know what?" Jack asked, keeping his rifle casually at hand. "Rutherford Bell is dead," Daniels announced without preamble. Victoria gasped softly. "Dead? How?" "Shot in Baltimore, according to the telegraph we received today." Daniels accepted the cup of coffee Victoria offered him. "Seems he had enemies closer to home than Colorado. Some business rival caught him cheating at cards and called him out." Victoria sank into a chair, stunned by the news. "It's over," she whispered. "Truly over." "Appears so," Daniels agreed. "Thought you folks would sleep easier knowing Bell won't be sending any more men your way." After the sheriff and his deputies departed, declining the offer to stay the night due to other duties, Victoria and Jack sat in silence before the fire, processing the unexpected news. "How do you feel?" Jack finally asked, watching Victoria's face carefully. "Relieved," she admitted, "and a little ashamed of my relief. I never wished him dead exactly, but now you're free of his shadow," Jack finished for her. "There's no shame in that." Victoria nodded slowly. "It feels like the last chain binding me to my old life has been broken." She moved to sit beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I'm fully here now. With you." Jack's arm tightened around her. "You always were," he said softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. That night, as the snow continued to fall outside, they celebrated their freedom and their future with a passion that left them both breathless and marveling at their good fortune in finding each other. The winter passed peacefully, the ranch isolated by deep snows but warm with contentment. Jack and Victoria fell into patterns of their own, making reading together in the evenings, sharing stories of their pasts, planning for the future of their ranch. They began to discuss improvements they might make in spring, expanding the garden, adding to the herd, perhaps building a proper guest room for when Thomas returned. In January, a letter arrived from Jack's mother, carried by a determined mail carrier who braved the mountain passes. Elizabeth Cole wrote that she was deeply moved by their invitation and would indeed come to Colorado in the spring, when travel was safer. She says she's eager to meet the woman who captured her son's heart. Jack read aloud, a mixture of nervousness and pleasure in his voice. Victoria, who had been feeling unwell for several days, smiled weakly from her place by the fire. "I look forward to meeting her too." Jack set the letter aside, concern crossing his face as he noticed Victoria's pallor. "You're still feeling sick?" Victoria nodded reluctantly. "It comes and goes. Mostly in the mornings." A look of dawning comprehension spread across Jack's features. "Victoria," he said slowly, "could you be—" Their eyes met in shared realization. Victoria's hands moved instinctively to her stomach. "I hadn't thought. But yes, it's possible." Jack crossed the room in 2 strides, kneeling before her chair. "A baby?" he whispered, awe and hope mingling in his voice. "I think so," Victoria confirmed, her own voice trembling with emotion. "It's too early to be certain, but all the signs are there." Jack's face transformed with a joy so pure it brought tears to Victoria's eyes. He gathered her gently in his arms, as if she had suddenly become infinitely precious and fragile. "A family," he murmured against her hair. "Our family." Victoria clung to him, overwhelmed by happiness and the wonder of creating new life with this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "I love you, Jack Cole," she whispered fiercely, "more than I have words to express." "And I love you," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You and our child with everything I am." As winter slowly yielded to spring, Victoria's condition became more certain. Her morning sickness eased, replaced by a blooming vitality that made her more beautiful than ever in Jack's eyes. They began to prepare for the baby's arrival, converting a small room adjacent to theirs into a nursery. Thomas returned as promised, bringing with him news from Denver and beyond. He was delighted by the prospect of a baby on the ranch, immediately appointing himself honorary grandfather and protector. "This little one will have the best of everything," he declared, already planning to build a cradle and various toys. In late April, Elizabeth Cole arrived from Philadelphia, a dignified woman with Jack's blue eyes and a reserve that quickly melted in the face of her son's obvious happiness. She and Victoria formed an immediate bond, united in their love for Jack and their excitement about the coming child. "I never thought I'd see my son settled with a family of his own," Elizabeth confided to Victoria one afternoon as they worked together in the garden. After his father died, Jack became so closed off, so determined to need no one. "He still struggles with that sometimes," Victoria admitted, "but less each day." Elizabeth smiled, her eyes on her son as he repaired a fence in the distance. "You've been good for him. I see that clearly." "He saved my life," Victoria said simply, "in every way that matters." "And you saved his," Elizabeth replied, "though he might never say it in those words." The ranch flourished that summer, as if reflecting the happiness of its inhabitants. The cattle herd increased, the garden yielded bountifully, and Victoria's pregnancy progressed without complications. Jack hovered protectively, insisting she rest frequently and hiring a local girl to help with household chores. "I'm pregnant, not invalid," Victoria protested, though she secretly cherished his concern. "Humor me," Jack would reply, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I'm new at this husband and father business." As autumn approached once more, they celebrated their first wedding anniversary with a small gathering of neighbors and friends. Victoria, now visibly pregnant, glowed with contentment as Jack toasted, "To the auction that brought me the greatest treasure of my life." Later, as they stood alone on the porch watching the sunset, Victoria leaned back against Jack's chest, his hands resting protectively over her rounded belly. "1 year ago today, I became Victoria Cole," she mused. "I had no idea then how complete my happiness would be." Jack's arms tightened around her. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing the question he had posed on their wedding night. Victoria turned in his embrace to face him. "Only that we didn't find each other sooner," she answered truthfully. "But perhaps we needed to walk those separate paths to truly appreciate where they led." Jack's hand cupped her cheek tenderly. To this moment, with you carrying our child beneath your heart. To home, Victoria whispered as his lips found hers. 2 weeks later, Victoria went into labor during a crisp October afternoon. Elizabeth and the local midwife took charge, shooing a pale-faced Jack from the bedroom with assurances that all was proceeding normally. The hours that followed were the longest of Jack's life. He paced the front room, flinching at each cry from upstairs, while Thomas attempted to distract him with inconsequential conversation and whiskey that Jack refused to drink. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time, Thomas reminded him. Victoria's strong. I know, Jack replied, running a hand through his hair for the 100th time. But if anything happened to her. Nothing's going to happen, Thomas said firmly. Have faith, boy. Near midnight, a different cry echoed through the house, the unmistakable wail of a newborn. Jack froze, his heart seeming to stop and then restart with painful force. Minutes that felt like hours passed before Elizabeth appeared at the top of the stairs, her face weary but radiant. Jack, she called softly, come meet your daughter. He took the stairs 2 at a time, hardly aware of his movements until he stood in the doorway of their bedroom. Victoria lay propped against pillows, her hair damp with sweat but her eyes luminous as she cradled a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. Jack, she whispered, looking up at him with a smile that stole his breath. Come see what we made. On legs that suddenly felt unsteady, Jack approached the bed and gazed down at the tiny, perfect face of his daughter. She had a dusting of dark hair and skin still flushed from the effort of being born. As he watched, she yawned, her rosebud mouth forming a perfect O. She's beautiful, he managed, his voice thick with emotion. Like her mother. Victoria shifted the baby slightly. Would you like to hold her? With reverent care, Jack gathered his daughter into his arms, marveling at how small and light she was, yet how completely she filled his heart. What shall we call her? He asked, unable to take his eyes from her face. I thought perhaps Elizabeth after your mother, Victoria suggested. We could call her Beth. Jack nodded, too overcome to speak for a moment. Then he cleared his throat and addressed his daughter directly. Welcome to the world, Elizabeth Cole. You are so very loved. As if in response, the baby opened her eyes blue like her father's and seemed to study his face with solemn concentration. She knows you, Victoria said softly. She recognizes the voice she's been hearing these past months. Jack carefully returned Beth to Victoria's arms, then sat on the edge of the bed beside them, overwhelmed by the fierce protective love that surged through him. Thank you, he whispered, pressing his forehead to Victoria's. For our daughter. For our life together. Victoria's free hand came up to touch his cheek. I should be thanking you, if you hadn't raised your hand that day in Willow Creek. I was meant to find you, Jack said with quiet certainty. Everything in my life led me to that moment, to that auction block. As baby Beth drifted to sleep in the safety of her mother's arms, Jack and Victoria shared a kiss filled with promises of enduring love, of family, of a future brighter than either could have imagined when fate first brought them together. In the years that followed, the story of how they met became family legend told first to Beth, then to her brothers James and Thomas, born 2 and 4 years later respectively. The children would listen wide-eyed as their parents recounted how their father had claimed their mother from an auction block and how love had grown from that desperate beginning. The Flying C Ranch prospered and expanded, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Jack's reputation for fair dealing and Victoria's for hospitality made them respected figures in the community. Thomas remained with them until his peaceful passing at age 78, beloved by the children who called him Grandpa Tom. Elizabeth Cole divided her time between Philadelphia and Colorado, eventually selling her eastern home to live permanently with her son's family, delighting in her grandchildren and the ranch life she had once fled. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the work of the day was done, Jack and Victoria would often sit together on the porch, watching the stars emerge above their land, their hands clasped together in silent acknowledgement of the journey that had brought them home. "Still mine," Jack would sometimes murmur, pressing a kiss to Victoria's temple, and she would smile, leaning into his embrace, secure in the knowledge that she had found not ownership but partnership, not possession but belonging. "Always," she would reply, "as you are mine." From an auction block of tears to a life of joy, their love story, unlikely and beautiful, continued to unfold beneath the vast Colorado sky, a testament to courage, second chances, and the transformative power of love freely given and gratefully received.